Hey folks, it's PJ from Wisconsin Airgunners. Today we have the AEA Varmint in 25 caliber, and I'd say on the bench to test, but we're going to take it out and shoot it off a tripod, a bag rest tripod arrangement in field conditions, because if you want my opinion, this is definitely an out in the field gun. So stay tuned and we'll get right into the review. The AEA HP Varmint comes in a couple different calibers. You can check it out either on the Pellet Shop or Utah Airgun's website. I know there are other retailers out there that carry them, but those are the two retailers that I'm familiar with and feel comfortable recommending that carry this. The Varmint is kind of a, I think, overlooked offering in the AEA lineup. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think it's a really solid bolt action. I would say medium to medium long range. No difficulty making shots out in the 70-80 yard range. So I think it has a lot of applications for pesting. With a name like the Varmint, you sort of expect it to be a good pesting gun. We're going to do test shooting today with the 25 cal Hades pellet from JSB, which seems to be flying pretty well. We're going to do accuracy testing, a little group work, and then we're going to do some know your limits, and I'll throw in a few pictures of some pest control that was done with this rifle on the backyard range. But first, let's talk about features. I want to start with the first thing I noticed, which is out here in the front. It's kind of a long barreled gun. This is not all barrel inside the shroud. There are baffles in here. And I have replaced the end cap with the DonnyFL adapter so that I can put the Fat Boy as well as the Fat Boy extender on here. So ordinarily you would be looking at this much if you just went Fat Boy. I opted to go Fat Boy and the extender, which does give you an overall pretty long profile. But let me tell you a story about my first experience with the gun. I aired it up. I went to dry fire it just to see what I was sort of getting myself into. And it was pretty loud. Now, when I did the dry firing, I was inside, so there's lots of reflective surfaces, but it's pretty loud. I put the Fat Boy and the extender on, and I thought it was broken. It was that quiet. So, okay. No issues that I can tell shooting it on the backyard range if it's going to be that quiet. I do have neighbors, and if I shoot a gun that's overly loud, I get some looks and sometimes some questions. It's legal to shoot air rifles in the jurisdiction I live in, so nobody's going to call, but I do have to live next to folks, and I'd like to keep the peace. So quiet guns are the rule on the backyard range. I loaded up some 25 grain JSB pellets and took a shot. It immediately went supersonic. So the gun was quiet, but man, was I surprised by the sonic crack. I'll throw up the numbers here, but I also tried the 33 grain pellet, and this gun does have some adjustability. It is an unregulated gun, but they do give you the ability to turn down the transfer port. So that's what I did, and it didn't take much. I actually turned it down. If you look at the graduations on the side of the gun, I'll throw a picture up this because this is going to be easier to see in a close-up photo. But basically you have like 3 main hash marks that you can dial to, and then there's 2 sub hash marks between each of those other spots, left or right. And I don't think it matters whether you go left or right of the fully open line. I basically went 1.5 of those sub lines, brought it down to a really nice place, saw very consistent, for an unregulated gun, very consistent readings, and that's what I decided to go with because I got to a velocity that I knew either the 33 grain JSBs or the slightly lighter, I think 26 grain Hades was going to travel pretty well at. So that's what I'm shooting now, and that's the accuracy that you're seeing with those rounds at the distances we're shooting. So first impression was it's a pretty loud gun, but that's all about the power it's putting out. It's fairly easy to moderate, adapter and a moderator, you're all set. You will either have to go with a very heavy projectile or probably turn that not hammer spring, but transfer port down. It does not have the carbon fiber bottle, has a almost now old school steel cylinder. I do like the matte finish on it. I think this will hold up really well for field use. And if you wanted to have a pick rail out here for mounting it on a bipod or Arca Swiss for clamped tripod work, you could certainly get a Saber Tactical bottle clamp, put it on there, and you'd be all set. You have pressure gauge in front of the trigger guard, and this does fill by way of a fill probe. I'm not a huge fan of fill probes. I don't know anybody who's like, man, get me a gun that has a fill probe. But this does share a probe with some of the other guns in the AEA lineup. And at least AEA sends you a probe that is milled out for standard connection to a Foster adapter. So you don't have to actually screw it into anything to get it to work. They also send it with a couple extra O-rings. Eventually an O-ring on a fill probe is going to go bad, so at least you can replace those. It lists 3600 PSI maximum fill, so I have respected that. And while I haven't done a full shot string top to bottom, chart it all out, because really you'll have to do that for your own gun to really get the most out of it. I have been shooting 4 magazines out of it, and still going strong. So you're going to get kind of shots for days on this. It's a pretty efficient system. As I mentioned, it's a bolt action, so that comes up, comes back, goes forward. That probes a new pellet out of the magazine. The magazine is pretty standard AEA affair. In 25 cal, you get 10 shots. It is the style where you rotate the cover around, drop one in backwards, and then put the rest nose first into the magazine. And they're not the easiest to work with, but they're also pretty reliable and inexpensive, so they have their pluses. The one thing I will say about the magazine is it does not have what I'd call like a stop indicator. So it is possible that you could manipulate the bolt forward and fire dry. So you may want to count rounds, I guess, to make sure you're not doing that. But there's nothing wrong with the magazines. They work just fine. As far as the trigger goes, if you are familiar with and comfortable with an AR trigger, you're going to be right at home here. It is what I would say is a single stage affair. You get a little bit of pullback, just really a little bit of pullback, and then it fires. And this is full of air right now. I'm using a microphone, and it's hard to judge, but Boy, with the Fat Boy 2.0 and that extender on here, it is all you are hearing is mechanical noise, and there's a little bit of ping noise coming from the action. But let's get a measurement on this trigger. Five and a half. And I've done this trigger pull test a bunch of times. Mostly it comes up between 5.6 and 5.10. So 5.5 is right on what I've seen shooting it over and over and over and doing that. So I'm not going to run through like 3 or 4 of those. I think you can count on a trigger pull of about 5.5 pounds. It's not match grade. It's not marketed as match grade. It's very functional. And I would say it's predictable in the way it goes off. And for those of you who come from a real steel shooting background, especially if you've been shooting an AR, you're gonna be right at home with this trigger. And while we're on the topic, it's a very AR feeling grip. It's not an AR grip as far as I know. I don't think you can take it off and swap it out with an AR grip. But to be honest, I like the grip. I like the angle. It's got cutouts which are right for my hand and very comfortable. So I have no issues there. The safety, forward and back here, I think some people have commented that it's a little bit weird that back is fire and forward is safe. Once you have it in your head and you know which way it's going, I don't have any problems with it. It's positive and it works every time. Now we get into some of the like interesting features, I think, for some people, and that is that you have a folding stock. Not only do you have a folding stock, but it's telescoping. So if you've got a need or a want to change length of pull, either because you've got some smaller sized people that are going to be shooting the gun, or you're changing your shooting position where to get your eye relief right, you need a little bit more or a little bit less, those options are there for you. And of course, if you're trying to put it in a case and you're concerned about the length, you can always fold that back. It's still a pretty long gun. I think, you know, when you think about the Varmint guns of old where they're doing long distance shooting and you've got really long barrels, to me this reminds me of that. I find it to shoot, you know, with the trigger pull very smoothly. You do hear a little bit of that ping, but you're not with a moderator hearing really anything coming from the muzzle. Very, very quiet. It does have a dovetail rail on top. I've put a little Picatinny block there with a little bit of cantilever so I can mount this Hawke scope. Actually won this scope, and it's a great match for this gun. It's a 4-16 with a parallax adjustment on the side and you know, locking turrets. So really good setup, pairs well, and I like how it lays out. Nice clear glass. So I think as far as functions, you know, how the gun works, that's pretty much it. We're gonna head out and I'm gonna take some shots off the tripod. I'm gonna shoot first for some groups, and then I'm gonna hit a know your limits rack. We do have some wind out today. The official wind number for me is 18 miles an hour. Shooting into the woods, that's softened just a little bit. But as you look at the groups, just keep in mind we do have a fairly windy day today. But we want to see how these Hades perform at 50 yards. And after that, we'll be back in for some final thoughts before we wrap the video up. We have a camera set up on the target. And what we're going to do is take 2 5-shot groups. We're at 50 yards and we're shooting in what's being currently reported as a 15-mile-an-hour wind. Though I will tell you, because of the woods that we're shooting through, we get some strong pushes and it gets carved up just a little bit. So, but we'll see how she does at 50. That's 2 shots. And we're going in for a reload. All right, let's go take a look at those groups. So here we go. We've got the first group here. I'd say I'll give you an inch on that, and probably pretty close to that on the second group. But we'll get some measurements on that. Honestly, for off a tripod and in the wind, that's not too terribly bad. Not clamped into the tripod either. I'm just using a C-shaped bag and kind of letting her fly. I would say, looking over at the rifle, sorry. I would say this rifle could benefit from a better trigger, but if you're familiar with and comfortable with an AR style trigger, 5.5 pounds is not out of the range of what you're probably used to. Okay, so we're back on the 2Vets tripods Recon model. I've got a know your limits set up at 30 yards, and we're going to see what the Varmint can do. Well, what I can do. Well, I don't know that you can ask for more than that. I'm gonna go with saying I'm pretty impressed on that. I'm gonna go down and just show you exactly the size of that know your limits setup. I'll take that. I did a fresh paint on the know your limits setup before I came out to shoot this, and you can see on this one I was holding a little bit thinking the wind was going to push it to the right. It didn't push as much as I thought. Came back pretty close to center on that one. That one didn't hit as I'd like, but it did hit. Dead center, dead center, dead center a little high. And then the little guy. You see how small that is. I don't know what more you want out of, well, a varmint gun. Before we go back into the bench and kind of wrap this up, give you some final thoughts, I did want to talk briefly about the tripod I'm using. This is the Recon by Two Vets tripods. This is not only the best tripod I own, but it's actually the best tripod I've ever used. It's very stable. Most tripods, the tripod design is stable. Any tripod you use should be stable. If you're using a tripod that isn't stable, you should get rid of it and get a better one. Okay, it's stable. Carbon fiber legs, so its weight to strength ratio is strength to weight ratio. That's the way I want to go, is high. Okay, it's strong for how light it is. It allows you to put in different heads. If I'm shooting Arca Swiss, I've got a ball head that's here, super smooth, big knobs, easy to control. When I'm shooting with a bag like this, and you know, you can go like this. There are different bags that have like more, call them feet, whatever, that probably work even better than this one. But I like giving myself that nice C shape right there. Great stable shooting platform, and you saw what I was able to do with this rifle. The thing that truly makes this remarkable, as far as I'm concerned, is how high it goes. I don't have it all the way up, but let me show you this. And what this allows me to do with that head on there is actually take shots up to and above 30-degree angle, which I do fairly often out on the farm, shooting pigeons off of silos. So even for the tallest of us, this tripod is going to be able to give you stability even to take high angle shots. I have not found a tripod that is more smooth in its operation, nor have I found one that goes as high as this one goes. So really easy recommendation. And if you're looking for one of these and you want the height, again, it's the Two Vets tripod Recon. So let's head inside and finish this up. Let's talk pros and cons about the AEA Varmint. I should say this up front. Well, it's the end of the video. It's not up front at all. I like the gun. It performed well in all the testing I did. For an unregulated gun, I think you get really good accuracy, and it definitely delivers in the power category. I think it's a little bit overlooked by some people. I think there's a lot of attention paid to some of the other AEA guns that I don't know that they perform that much better. So if you're looking at an AEA gun and you want to get into some of those middle distances out to 75 yards, maybe doing a little pest control, I would definitely give this one a look. If you compare it to the Challenger Pro, which is regulated, this one is significantly lighter, and that may be a factor for you. Okay, so cons. It's long. Boy, if I knew a machinist, and John, Izzy, I'm talking to you, I might take this shroud and cut it down to size a little bit and see what happens getting rid of those baffles, go right to the adapter and the fat boy. And I think you'd have a little bit shorter of a gun. I think you'd still get pretty good noise reduction. This thing is stupid quiet when you're, like if you're dry firing in the house and you've got that fat boy with the extender on there. It sounds broken all you're hearing. And it's throwing quite a bit of air out, but all you're hearing is the hammer hitting the valve and a little bit of ping in that bottle. Other than that, it's dead quiet. And out on the range at 50 yards, I'm shooting against a solid wood backstop. On the other side of the cardboard I was shooting at, you are absolutely hitting the pellet, or hearing the pellet hitting the wood. You're not really hearing the gunfire very much. So it can be made very quiet. The magazines are a little bit putsy. Getting that first one in, skirt first, is sometimes a little bit of a pain. On the other side of that, it's pretty easy for them to produce those magazines in a cost favorable way to us, so you don't have to pay a ton to get extras. The trigger, like I said, it's pretty typical AR. I think it's a little bit heavy, but it is predictable. So I'm not going to say it's awful. In fact, it's better than the triggers on quite a few guns I've shot. At least it's predictable. It's just heavy, 5.5 pounds. If you're used to shooting, guns that are between 1 and 2 pounds, you're going to have to make that adjustment to your shooting in order to get the most accuracy out of it. The buttstock, you love it or you hate it. Some people like the sort of minimalistic style that they've gone with. Others, want something a little bit bigger. I like it, so it works just fine for me. I don't have any problems. It's actually the same stock I have on my AR. The safety, I guess there is one thing to note about it. If it's not cocked, you can't put it into safe. It's just the way the mechanism works. The thing's not broken. It's not cocked. I've actually used that as a check to see whether or not it's cocked, because if it won't go into safe, it's not cocked. Other than that, the safety works just fine. It's very positive. Binds that trigger up. You're not going to have any issues that way. To mount the scope, I did, rather than getting like extra high mounts in dovetail, I did buy a dovetail to Picatinny riser, and then I went with Picatinny scopes. I would actually recommend that. The riser that I used was a short Monstrum with just a little bit of a cantilever section, and it set it perfect to take a scope like this Hawke that I'm using. The Hawke's a pretty decent scope, and you could certainly make worse choices than this one if you're looking for an affordable optic to put on a rifle like this. The last thing to talk about, and maybe the most important, accuracy. I shot 2 5-shot groups to try and give you an idea of how the gun shoots. Keep in mind, I wasn't shooting off a bipod, off a bench. I was standing up with a tripod out in the wind. We had variable winds between 15 and 17 miles an hour today. The wind was definitely blowing through the woods, though not always. We're shooting the Hades pellet, which, because of the front end, doesn't quite have the BC that some of the dome pellets are, but I'm setting this up as a hunting gun. And if you want to shoot a hunting gun, you shoot the hunting pellets. So this is the results with the Hades. These groups are probably, well, I'll put them up there, I would guess center to center, somewhere between 1 inch and 1.25 inches. That's not bad. Certainly all of these shots, 10 shots in a row, would have hit a squirrel at 50 yards, and I'll take that. When I went to 30 yards, okay, it's 20 yards closer, right? But what I was able to do on that Know Your Limits rig, and you guys can believe this, you don't have to. I don't have the time. I have a full-time job that's not connected to YouTube. I don't have the time to shoot groups over and over and over again until I get one that looks good on film. I put air in the gun, I put pellets in the gun, and I go shoot. This was a one-take shot. What I did on the Know Your Limits set, that was one take. It's an accurate gun. I would have to, if I was going to shoot this full-time, I would have to spend more time really getting to know that trigger. I'm used to a little lighter trigger, and I have arthritis in my trigger finger, of all places. So this one is a little stiff for me, but for you young folks out there, take care of your joints and shoot guns with stiff triggers while you can. because you get to be an old man and you start looking for that nice 1.5 pound release. I'm satisfied with this accuracy for an unregulated gun in stiff wind off a tripod, a really good tripod, but off a tripod nonetheless, standing up. I'll take these groups all day. If you were out with this gun prairie dog hunting, this would be 10 dead prairie dogs. Well, thanks for tuning in to this review of the AEA Varmint in 25. I hope you've either enjoyed or learned something from it, maybe even a little bit of both. If you would like to support the channel, do us a favor and hit that thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber already, it would be great to have you as a regular viewer. And if you have something to say about the video, questions, or especially positive comments, we really do appreciate those, and we try to reply just to as many of them as we can. Until the next video, folks, shoot safe, shoot straight, and we'll see you around.